Now, if you have watched any of my concrete videos, you're going to know that I am all about preparing the subgrade. It is probably the single most important factor to the overall success and the lifespan, really, of the work you're doing. Compacted fill, filter fabric, vapor barriers, all of it. It's important. If your concrete slab is sitting on expansive or saturated or uncompacted fill or dirt, the finish doesn't really matter much because that slab's going to crack or heave and you're going to have much larger problems on your hands than any other mistake you could make. Remember that your concrete will never be any more stable than whatever it is that it's sitting on. Now, coincidentally, this might be just about one of the most well-prepared subgrades I've ever poured on top of. There's about 20 inches of 2-inch rock, well compacted, then a layer of filter fabric, then about 12 inches of 1-inch minus rock with a vapor barrier layered in there someplace. And yes, this is overkill. But it just worked out this way after all the excavation we did and with the finished grade we wanted. You get the idea. Now, we've done several other videos about concrete flat work. Maybe you've seen them on the channel. And so the details around rebar placement and grades and slopes and mixed designs have probably been covered in those other videos, and I may not hit on them too intensively in this video. One of the first things that makes this pour somewhat different is that it is part of an overall pour strategy with the flat work that's going to go in and around this building. The garage floor needed to go first so that we could secure the building. Can't very well put a garage door in until the floor is in for the guys to set the door on. I mean, we could, but it builds in work and makes the garage door vulnerable to concrete work, that sort of thing. So in order to get a nice, secure work area that'll remain protected from the elements under the roof, we feel very confident that it's time to put the garage floor in. One mistake that's really easy to make with pouring concrete, particularly flat work, scattered around and inside of a building, is biting off more than you can chew. There's a perfectly normal impulse to, since you're mobilizing a pump and a truck and a place and finish crew, that you might as well just get all that you can. And that's true, as long as you are able to realistically project just how fast that chemical reaction is going to happen and how much time is going to have to be spent getting the finished product that you, and more importantly, the client, is going to be happy with. Oddly enough, I think, and it's a hip shot, but the 50 yards of rock that we put under this concrete is going to end up being more expensive and take more time than the 8 yards of concrete that we're going to put on top of it. Now, it doesn't always work like that, and costs like that are not always predictable, but you may be interested to know that we do have and will have the costs for everything that we do here put up on a page for our supporters, and you can check out the information about how to access those costs in the notes below the video. All of that being said, and most of that being true, concrete pour days are exciting. And besides that, they're fun to watch. I even like watching these guys do what they do. Concrete's going to be here in an hour. Got lots of time and we're all ready. But before this is covered up forever, there's a couple things I want to point out. The first of them is that I really don't want this to crack much. Now, it's undoubtedly going to crack some, but I intend to control the cracking and force it to crack in the bottom of saw cuts. I've not put any slip dowels out here on this mat because the concrete's going to shrink in this space. It's going to pull away from all four sides, and so with that in mind, I'm putting extra cuts in. I'm going to create squares that are about 6.5 feet by 7.5 feet. But the thing that could really bite me is the inside corners that are created by the foundation. Here's an example of an inside corner. The concrete will pour up against this angle iron frame, and the inside corner concentrates the stress of the concrete shrinkage. The concrete's pulling back, and it creates, I'm going to call this, I don't think this is quite right, but it creates the effect of a weakened plane joint, and the crack is going to want to crawl out of here someplace. So one of the saw cuts that we're going to put in is running from this corner over to that doorway. Hopefully it'll capture that one. The other inside corner that I'm concerned about is right over here where the door goes into the house. Now this corner is about only, I think, 38 degrees or so, but it's still a corner and the concrete's going to want to break in some direction. So I put this little piece of 1/8 inch plate about 1.5 inches below grade, and then we're going to come over the top of this with a saw cut. So essentially the concrete slab will be cut, severed all the way through, top to bottom, held together with these 4 pieces of number 3 bar, so you don't get any shifting. I mean, it can't lift at the break, but it's going to force this crack to come this direction so it will look intentional. The rest of this is garden variety, right? A lot of rock, moisten the subgrade. It's about 4.5 inches thick, maybe average is about almost 5 inches thick, so there's lots of coverage over the top of 2 1/2-inch bars. Got this little angle iron frame that's going to receive the trap door down into the crawl space. This is just garden variety flat work under a roof in the shade on a beautiful spring day. How can you beat that? I'm going to let you just watch this pour, and I'll talk about a few of the things that are going on. But I'm not going to tell you what I think the big secret is to finishing concrete like a pro until the very end. I want to see if you can guess it after watching these guys do what they do. The first thing to point out is this chalk line right along the stem wall. I snapped this out very carefully on all 3 sides, and it is our target for the finished elevation of the slab. It slopes at about 2% or 1/4 inch per foot towards the door, and this is what Jeff is looking at as he pumps his way around the perimeter of the garage. Now, it's easy enough to see and match this line on the stem wall, but out in the field, in the middle of the floor, it gets a lot tougher to estimate the grade. And that's what this board in the center of the garage is for. This is known as a top screed, and it's installed to match the finished grade of the slab as it slopes towards the door opening. Now, floating concrete is simultaneously pushing down the rocks, pulling up the cream, and cutting the mud to exactly the right height in one process. Rich is carefully floating the edge to grade because, as you can see, there is no top screed or form for Dustin to rest the screed rod on as he pulls the concrete to grade. He's got to maintain the correct height with his arms, with his back, with his legs, using that soft mud as a reference. And believe me, it's a lot harder than it looks. Rich can rest his end of the board on the top screed, so his job right now is a lot easier to get right. On the other side of the garage, now it's Rich that has the hard job of wet screeding, wet rodding. The simplest task here is actually in the hands of the guy in the middle, the mucker, the mud cutter, who in this case is me. I'm adding and removing mud as needed so the guys are not pulling any more than necessary, and like everything else, it's easy to do and hard to do right. If they're moving too much mud with the rod, or if there's not enough mud in the right place at the right time, things start getting out of whack quickly, and progress will slow way, way down. Dustin is screeding a little extra slope right at the front of the slab, in front of where the garage door will come to rest. This creates sort of a threshold, just like you would see at any other exterior door. Now, to ensure proper cracking, Dustin pushes a trowel right down through the joint, which will almost guarantee that the crack will form right here. Power trowel beats hand finishing in every single aspect on a finish like this. And there's really only one thing that it can't do, which is finish nice and tight up to the walls or the inside corners. That's handwork. Nothing we can do about it today. But out in the middle, in the bulk of the floor, in the field as it's called, by keeping after the process with multiple passes spread out over the whole afternoon, we're after what is called a burnished floor. The repeated troweling passes with steeper and steeper trowel angles and higher speeds as the floor gets harder and harder and harder results in a finish that is as smooth as glass, literally. In fact, it actually turns a dark charcoal gray color, and you can literally see your reflection in it when you're through.
Hey Matt, how's it going? Alright, I'm up here, we're getting ready to shoot sealer and then I'm going to saw cut in about 30. Alright, I'm at the very top, very end of it. Yes sir, bye.
2 gallons?
Oh, yeah, somewhere around halfway. It doesn't need that much, but whatever you don't fill up with liquid, you have to pump up by hand.
Yeah.
So it's easier to pour it back in.
That's right.
The acrylic cure and seal we're putting on here is doing at least 2 things. Number 1, it traps moisture inside the concrete so that it continues to harden for a longer period of time. This is known as curing and results in a harder slab. And number 2, the same seal that keeps the moisture in for curing will help keep future things out. Concrete is very porous and can be stained by chemicals, oils, paints, acids, you name it. Almost anything can seep into the slab, and so a cure and seal helps the slab keep clean or clean looking for much longer. Think of it like a coat of varnish. Okay, the time has come for me to lay out there what I think is the secret to finishing concrete. And boiled down to one word, the answer has to be timing. Everything you watched Dustin and Rich and Jeff do was carefully organized and timed so that the individual processes were happening at the proper moment in the concrete hydration process. This video cannot convey the sense of urgency in the laying down process. The relaxing break that happened after it was floated. The horse race that Rich had trying to trowel the edges by hand as they went off. The time spent waiting in between power trowel passes, testing the hardness of the concrete with fingers and fingernails, looking at a watch, timing the minutes and the hours. And maybe the most obvious thing is understanding the best moment, the ideal moment, to hit the slab with the sealer wait till it dries, and then walk out there and cut it. Great concrete finishers understand the correct timing of when to float, when to Fresno, when to edge, how to modify a concrete order or the mix design based on temperatures or site conditions, because they know that the mix will affect the timing of the hydration process. They understand when to wait and let the concrete catch up, and when to panic and call for help to make sure the finished product is going to match expectations. These dynamics around timing fluctuate and change immensely depending on the type of the finish, the location of the pour, the time of the year, the size of the crew, the site access, frankly, the time of the day also. I mean, think of it. If the pour isn't going to start until 3 p.m. and there's only 4 or 5 or even 6 hours of daylight, the finisher is taking that into account, both when he orders the mix design and when he schedules the crew and when he decides how much time to spend on each part of the place and finish process. You know, as I think about this, I got to say that finishing concrete is something everyone should attempt and get a little experience with, because it's an ancient technology, right? It's deeply connected with civilization and human flourishing. It's scary, it's fun, it's permanent, and it can be really satisfying when something comes out nice. My advice, though, is to start small before you attempt something even remotely this size. And if at all possible, you've got to get some good help until you really understand what it is you're up against. Because a chemical reaction, my friends, is a wonderful and a miraculous and a brutally relentless thing. Thank you for watching Essential Craftsman, and keep up the good work.